Okay, so think about this. Millions of people in the US are working, participating in the economy, and they have to pay taxes, just like everyone else. But what happens if they can't get a social security number?
So, how do they do it? Well, the answer lies in a special 9-digit number that plays this massive, often overlooked role in our economy. Let's dive in and break down exactly what it is and how it all works.
All right, here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll break down exactly what an ITIN is. Then, we'll get into the nitty gritty of the application process. After that, we'll see how it's used for more than just taxes, for financial access. We'll also touch on some of the risks and controversies, and then wrap up by looking at what the future might hold for ITINs.
All right, first things first. What exactly is an ITIN and why does it even exist? So, it's called an Individual Taxpayer Identification Number, or ITIN for short. The IRS came up with this back in 1996, and they had one single goal in mind: tax compliance. It's all about making sure that anyone who is required to file a US tax return has a way to do it, even if they aren't eligible for a Social Security number. Okay, this is probably the most crucial thing to get straight. What an ITIN is not. It is strictly for filing taxes. That's it. It does not give you permission to work in the US, and it has nothing to do with Social Security benefits. And here's a little pro tip to tell them apart. An ITIN always starts with the number 9, and don't underestimate its impact. We're talking about a huge contribution to the economy. Just in 2019, ITIN filers contributed a net $5.8 billion. I mean, to put that in perspective, that is more than the entire GDP of some countries. So, yeah, this is a really significant part of the nation's tax base. Okay, so that's the what and the why. But how does someone actually get one of these? Well, the application process is super specific. So let's walk through it step by step. All right, everything starts with this form right here, the Form W-7. But here's the catch. You can't just send this form in by itself. And this is really key. You have to submit it along with a valid federal income tax return. You've got to prove to the IRS that you have a legitimate tax reason for needing this number. So it really boils down to three main steps. First, you fill out the forms. That's the W-7 and your tax return. Second, you have to gather up some very specific documents to prove who you are. And finally, you submit the whole package. You can either mail it in or take it to an IRS authorized center in person. And just a heads up, you're going to need some patience here. The timeline can really drag on. Normally, you're looking at about 7 weeks, but if you apply during the busy tax season, that can easily stretch to 9 or even 11 weeks. And getting your original documents back, wow, that can take up to 14 weeks. So you've got to plan for that. Yeah, the IRS is not messing around when it comes to proving your identity. They have a list of 13 approved documents, things like a national ID card or a US driver's license. But honestly, the easiest route by far is using a passport. Why? Because it's the only document that can prove both your identity and your foreign status all by itself. If you use anything else from this list, you're going to need to submit at least 2 different documents. Okay, so this is where the story takes a really interesting turn. This number, which was created for one very narrow purpose, just taxes, has kind of accidentally evolved into something much bigger. It's become this unofficial key to the rest of the financial system. Think about it. Because an ITN is an official number from the government, a lot of banks and lenders have started accepting it instead of a social security number. And this has been a total game changer for millions of people. It's let them do things we take for granted, like opening a bank account, building a credit history, or getting a car loan. The basic stuff you need to get by. And this isn't just happening on the down low. Financial institutions are actually building entire programs around this. Look at this quote from St. Cloud Financial Credit Union. They're openly saying they're proud to serve the ITN community. They see a whole market of people who want to bank and borrow, and they're creating services just for them.
But, this expanded role also brings us to the central conflict of the whole ITIN program. On one side, it's this great tool for tax compliance and financial inclusion. But on the other, it brings up some really serious questions about privacy and risk.
Which leads to what is probably the number one question on a lot of people's minds. Is it actually safe to use an ITIN? I mean, you're giving all your personal information to one part of the government, the IRS. Does that mean you're opening yourself up to scrutiny from other parts of the government?
Well, the answer is it's complicated. On the one hand, you have the IRS, which has incredibly strong privacy laws, like Section 6103 of the tax code basically forbids them from sharing your info. Their whole mission is just collecting taxes, not enforcing immigration laws. But on the other hand, there are exceptions. If there's a federal court order for a criminal investigation, they have to share the data. And that possibility has created this constant worry for people about who else might get their hands on their information.
So, with all that in mind, what's next for the ITIN program? Let's wrap things up by looking at a huge recent change and what it might tell us about the future. So, not too long ago, the IRS brought in this use it or lose it rule. Basically, if you don't use your ITIN on a tax return for 3 years in a row, it expires. Poof, gone. And this move really doubles down on the original purpose of the program, right? It's about making sure these numbers are being actively used for tax compliance and not just sitting around as a form of ID.
And that really brings us back to the central question of this whole story. The ITIN started out as a simple tool for the IRS, but it's pretty clear it's become something much, much more. A vital key to the economy for millions. So the real challenge now and the question for the future is how do you manage that dual role? A tool for tax compliance or a gateway to the economy? What do you think the next chapter for the ITIN will be?